Welcome to the Vet Show, episode number 14, brought to you by Nutritional Frontiers. Coach Robb, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Hey, good afternoon. Another month has gone by already. What in the world is going on? We're at the time of this recording, depending on when somebody listens to it, but we're sitting here another month. We're recording this in June of 2025. Where's the time going? I said this at the beginning of the last show, but I'm like, it seemed like just yesterday we were like, hey man, let's looking forward to that show tomorrow. Look at us. A
Uh,
month already.
Time absolutely is flying. I don't know. It seems like we just had New Year's and Christmas, and all of a sudden we're in June. My daughter's getting ready to get out of school, and it's just like I don't know. I don't know where Coach. Like they say when you're younger that time starts to fly as you age, and you kind of always say, it's kind of probably BS. It truly does.
Yeah. And we'll talk a lot about it here in today's show, but what's always crazy to me is maybe not so much for yourself being in California, with myself definitely not being in Florida. We really only have 2 seasons here in Florida, hot and hotter. So, like, when I've got athletes that are in parts of the country and parts of the world where literally they're under 6 feet of snow, it's like, man, the summer is like 8 months away. It feels like forever. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, my qualifier's next week. And you're just like, how did we get here? To your point exactly, is there's always tomorrow. I'll start tomorrow. There's next not I still have 6 months. 6 months turns into 3 pretty quick, and then 3 months turns into 3 weeks, and then boom, here you are. And you're like, I mean, at the time of this recording, we had our first round of regionals this weekend. I mean, it just seemed like yesterday we were talking about how well the vet riders that followed this show did at Loretta's, or trying to qualify for Loretta's, or World Vets in November. Remember us talking about World Vets post race?
Yeah, it's crazy. We're going to talk a lot about those timelines and the procrastination, and we in December, right? We were talking about, hey, you have Mammoth coming up, which Mammoth at the time of this recording is coming up, right? When this airs, it'll be just over. But you have Loretta's coming up, so we're going to talk a lot about that in this episode. But Coach, before we get started, I wanted to let you highlight Nutritional Frontiers. This is a new sponsor for the show this week. I want to let let the listeners know who they are, what they do, and how they can help them.
Well, if you guys have been following us on the Coach Rob store, Nutritional Frontiers is not new to you. Very fortunate. They've been our supplement supplier now for going on 6 years. And the reason why we partnered with them is just because their quality is absolutely the highest. My big thing with all of our products and services is I want to only provide the very best Garmin, the best tool for heart rate, whether it be for training or sleeping, energy fuel. Want to make sure it's specific to your intensity and your duration. Supplements, if you're going to take the time and invest in a supplement, fish oil, whey protein, creatine, whatever it may be, I just didn't want you to be buying something that's got a bunch of fillers. So, Nutritional Frontiers, you have to have a doctor's license to be able to sell it. So, we're very fortunate that we have them on our store. I do want you guys to be aware, go to the Coach Rob store and you'll see bundles. I'm always trying to find ways to save you guys money. You go in there, if you're looking at buying, the same 3 products every month, more than likely we have them in a bundle format. Could be like a broken bone or concussion, Dan, that we've talked about before. These are things that are so cool because when we look at bundling them, I want you guys to be able to save money on it. But more importantly, when you spend those hard earned dollars, that you get the highest quality. There's no fillers, there's no colors, there's no additives. One of my biggest pet peeves is you take it and all you have is expensive urine. And you won't get that with our stuff. It's not a sales pitch. People ask me, Rob, why is your whey protein so expensive? Because it's 100% whey protein. You're not going to get anything artificial. So, yeah, I appreciate you giving me a chance to talk about them. They've been a great partner of ours. And I hope we can have more of this type of involvement together with them moving forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. And as we age, right, we get more deficient in some of these vitamins and nutrients and whatnot. Is that a fact? Like as I get older, do I get more deficient of something where I need a supplement potentially?
It's a very interesting question because for all the listeners that are, especially with it being specific to vets, if you also maybe a younger athlete and you like in these conversations and maybe you learn something that's great. But think about our typical vet rider, Dan. A lot of stress personally and professionally, trying to squeeze in working on the bike, get to the track, maybe race on the weekends once or twice a month, maybe even every weekend. My point is a lot of stress. So what ends up happening with stress? Suppressed appetite. Suppressed appetite means what? You're not eating as much, means you're taking in less nutrients. You guys know I'm not an advocate for you to take supplements over real food. Think about the word by definition. Supplements are designed to interact with real food. Otherwise, literally, if you just take and gobble down supplements and you don't have food already in your system, it will go right through you. As I teach, you'll just have expensive urine. In regards to what you're saying, think about our listeners, Dan. This is why I'm proud of our subscribers and the people that are loyal followers. I'm 57 years old. We are a tad bit more active than your typical 57-year-old athlete. So to your point, yes, our listeners are burning a lot more. Their needs are higher because they're at the peak of their professional career. Family's doing great. They want to do Mammoth. They want to do Loretta's. They want to do World Vets. The list goes on and on. So their expenditure and their, how fast they're burning through iron, zinc, B6, B12, all those little micronutrients. Yeah, you're going to be burning through them way faster than the guy next to you at work. And that's just a fact.
Interesting. Well, there you go. Nutritional Frontiers, part of the Coach Robb network of goodies. Like if you haven't been to coachrobbstore.com, it's pretty bitchin'. So make sure you guys check that out. I know this is never a sales pitch, coach, but
I appreciate it.
I have truly believed in your products for years now and your advice. And that's the other cool thing, right? If the listeners need advice, there's various different avenues to reach out to you to ask those questions and whatnot. So that's what's kind of unique as well to the program. Number 14, episode number 14. Now we talked, coach, and you know who I'm going to go with. And all the listeners, they know how old I am. They already know who I'm going to go with, but there's a number 14 in your heart that's a little bit special. And I want you to let the listeners know. Number 14, what do you think?
If you have been around motocross anywhere around the mid 70s, my first motorcycle was a 78 RM80. I've said that numerous times here on the show. And you know how it is when you're new to something, you're just a sponge. You can't get enough of it. I was teasing you previously. Remember when that motocross action would come, dirt bike, cycle news? I mean, you would just thumb through that to the point where you'd wear it out. And to me, when we get to number 14, Daryl Schultz, 1979 Daytona winner. Um, to this day, Dan, I still remember the 2-page spread with JT, and it would start from yellow on the left or whichever color direction, but they'd have all the Suzuki guys, Barnett and Howerton. Then they'd move to Honda. Then they'd move to the Cowie with Wardy and those guys. And then they'd move over to Suzuki with Howerton and Barnett. And I just remember in 79 when Suzuki came out, and that was the first time they put they put the blue onto the tank. Now, again, I'm going to show my age, my 78 RM80, solid steel tank, right? Metal tank. And so when those stickers were on there, you didn't have to worry about them rubbing off I mean, they did eventually, but think about it. You're putting stuff on a metal surface, but that Suzuki yellow with that Suzuki blue, and then to see Kent Howerton, Daryl Schultz, and, I still vividly being at that race in 79. I remember Daryl Schultz running the open face helmet, wearing the bright yellow gear. This is when everybody matched. If you were Mark Barnett and you're riding a Suzuki, you had Suzuki on your gear. It was Fox gear, but you were Suzuki. Because it was interesting how Barnett left JT and ended up going over to Fox. Ken Howerton, same thing. Wardy leaving JT and eventually ending up over at Cinesalo. And it's just really cool to me. That's where that number 14, Daryl Schultz, winning the 79 Daytona on that beautiful all yellow and beautiful blue. So that's why 14 is seared in my brain. It's kind of like seeing a girl nude for the first time, right? You're just like, you never forget it. You remember the first Playboy you ever saw. You probably can recite the ambiance, everything about it. Well, that was my first exposure to 14, and to watch him win Daytona was very, very cool. I was sad to see him get out of the sport a couple of years later. I don't know if you remember, but he went to Honda, and unfortunately his knees didn't want to hold up. And I know it's public knowledge, but that's just my little 2 bits on 14. I think I have a pretty good sneaking hunch where you're going to go with 14, and I think it's hard to argue with it.
Well, before I go to my number 14 is the Suzuki's. Like you said, I don't know what it is about Suzuki's, even still today. Like my buddy Eric just built a RMZ 450. and he wanted to build it because it was different. Like there's just not a lot of Suzukis out there. It's, Honda, Yamaha, K2. Not a lot of, but man, coach, the Suzukis, when they're done up, they look badass. They are the sickest looking bikes on the track, in my opinion, even though I'm a Cali guy, but man, they look really good. But number 14, Kevin Windham. I mean, K-Dub, that's my era. I mean, it would be hard pressed. Let me ask you this question. If you were to ask the general population when number 14 comes to mind, what do you think the percentage of people would say that K-Dub come to their mind?
I would say that a majority of them would come to their mind, but for two distinct reasons. For myself, I remember him riding for Honda and then moving over to Suzuki. I think for that next gen, it would be opening ceremonies.
Oh, 100%. The transfers and opening ceremonies.
Yep.
Oh, I always wanted to see do that. Like pick that up, coach.
McGrath.
I wanted to see AC pick that up.
Oh,
I think that would have been cool.
well, let me ask you this. Why did it get discontinued? I heard that it got a couple sketchy landings and then fell kind of tapped out on that one.
I don't know. I've never heard that, but if there's a few videos that you should have died, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Very,
and if you've ever been around, like I remember when I first started working with Dunge and Ricky and Dunge were looking at the Supercross track. It had just been built by Mark Barnett. We had two Supercross tracks. And I remember we were standing on the finish line jump and the track hadn't been ridden. Literally, they were just finished the day before. And we were standing on the finish line jump and we were looking all the way on the first lane. So when you guys are looking at the goat farm, like where the tree line is at, that would be first lane. And then you come the other direction. And I remember Ricky asking Ryan, hey, when you come out that right hander, what's your timing? And when Dungy gave his, Ryan said to Ricky, what would you do? And it was 100% completely different. And I bring that up because that's what I thought was so amazing about James Stewart and Kevin Windham. All of those guys, Chad Reed, all those guys are beasts, right? Justin Brayton, all of them are phenomenal. They see things that we just don't see. And when you see those transfers come out, you're like, I never thought about that, much less pull it off. And some of them were big. I mean, going over 2-3 lanes and just hanging a leg off. And it's just like, poof. So that's why I would say if there's a cross generation, it would be opening ceremonies when they went to the races with their dad and their mom and saw him do transfers. Or if you're older like me, you remember him out there. Remember the Hondas where the front number plate was like 4 feet by 4 feet wide?
oh, yeah.
Those big white front number plates were just gargantuous. But yeah, I personally, talking about ironically Suzuki, I have more memories of Kevin on Suzuki than I do on Honda. Just
Really?
because to me, Kevin was always he always had to, like, he reminded me of a modern day David Bailey. Have you ever seen David Bailey ever not look crisp on a motorcycle?
He's like the Iceman, man. He's just
Exactly. And same thing with Wardy on Cowie, right? To me, you had Bailey on Honda, you had Wardy on Kawasaki. I felt like Barnett was pretty tight with Suzuki, when he was riding the full floater in 81. You just had those riders that were super crisp. Of course, now that I'm saying that out loud, think about Lachine, whether he was on Honda or Cowie, he was always, he always wore the white. He was predominantly white colored jerseys and stuff. That always looked super crisp. I miss that, to be honest with you. I miss that. I'm not saying today's don't look as good, but to me, they look like they're wearing pajamas. That's just my biased opinion. I would not wear a onesie. I won't wear in our triathlons. I won't wear a onesie. I still do a separate sniglet and a separate set of shorts. I mean, I'm not running in my PJs.
I have no idea what Sniglet is, coach, but
It's just like when you see the professional runners, like when you watch the London Marathon or Boston or New York Marathon, and they have, just a small little shirt on. It's designed to just wick away heat, right? And so in the triathlon world, we can swim with those, we can bike with them and run with them. Nowadays, they've got them where the cycling shorts, it goes up and over like a set of bibs, and then it has like a shirt like I'm wearing right now, and it's super thin, and there's all kinds of science behind it for wicking away heat, etc. But you look really stupid. And to me, I don't, it's not how fast you go, it's how fast you go and look good. And if you look like a dork, it supersedes going fast, in my opinion. So I hope everybody sees that as tongue in cheek being funny. But yeah, to me, I look at Bailey, super crisp. when we had the motocross designations, and it was O'Mara, Bailey, and I think it was Johnson that year, wasn't it? Was that the
I
three where they slapped five when they went over the jumps together? Just think about how crisp that Honda team was, and
iconic look of the sport for
it
sure.
really was. Not that I don't like today's stuff, but um, compare the A Star gear. I know you're a big fan of Jason Anderson, with Cowie and stuff, but look at, like, even this past weekend, look at how confusing uh, Jet Lawrence's jersey is. He's got 1 and an 8 on either shoulder, and it's all these odd. Now, again, my wife's an artist. She thinks it looks great. She's like, "Oh, it's so abstract and different." I get it. I'm left brain, zeros and ones. I want everything in a perfect little box. Um, Different strokes for different folks, but I'm going to always go the Jeff Stanton Super Crisp, David Bailey Super Crisp, Jeff Ward Super Crisp, uh, Lachine Super Crisp. I mean, we can go down the list. Then you look at McGrath, right? He brought cool and crisp in. Think about Jeff Emig and the all black shift, so crisp. Now today's stuff is almost like, you remember when it was the bright colors and it looked like paint splash. Even the Suzuki's, remember when the the graphics were look like they've been thrown paint at. Again, not my jam, but that's fine. We're still talking about it, so it worked.
That's just what the young kids like, coach. We're getting old, man. We're getting old. That's the kids like the crazy designs and looks and stuff. You and I like the nice, clean, simple. That's like Fox. I'm a Fox guy. And they always typically have just some nice, clean stuff. But there's been some years where they've gotten a little wacky, but anyhow,
Isn't it cool that the Fox head is the old is the new?
everything comes full circle like that. It seems like
But
which is
what's funny is, think about our music. I'm a little bit older than you are. People, you go to a football game, you go to a baseball game, you go to the mall, and there's 80s music playing, and if you watch people, they're singing along, they're having a good time. And then you don't hear a song that was popular 4 years ago playing and people are singing along. If you do, it's a very small percentage. So I look at the idea that that original Foxhead with the yellow and the orange, the fact that that's the new cool. Like at Loretta's last year, everybody that was a Fox rider, they all wore that gear, and it stood out on the gate like nobody's other. And I just said to Michaela, I find it amazing because when that Foxhead was popular, JT had the market share. Now, Fox has a larger, well, JT doesn't really exist. I'd say it's less than 0.5% now, right? But isn't it cool? Like you said, the old is the new is the retro, and retro is still cooler than anything else. And it's always in the same genre of 80s music, 80s gear, 80s bikes, 80s looks of graphics. It all comes back around. We're still the coolest generation, and everyone who listens to this vet show will validate that. It's
well,
the coolest gen.
I gotta say, before we move on, I'm super proud of my 9-year-old daughter because she loves the Cure, the Depeche Mode, uh,
Yes.
you know, Def Leppard, like all those old '80s bands she's into. So we're
You've
we're
done well.
doing her right. So
Yes, you and mom have done a good job if your daughter can cite that. So props to you. And I think everybody that listens to the vet show they're shaking their head right now going, yes, bring it on.
all right, let's get into it. Episode 14. This one's going to be train smarter, not harder. We talked, Coach, about getting started as far as, back in December, right? We kind of just touched on that Mammoth is in June, mid-June. Loretta's is coming up in August, and that you need to prepare for those races, and you got to prepare 6 months in advance. And there's people that have done that, there's people that have not done that, and we can that could be a whole show on its own. But um we wanted to kind of talk about, there's 5 bullet points today that we want to touch on. The first one is addressing and identifying weaknesses. And coach, like we talked, there's some guys that have been working the last 6 months. There's some guys that have not been working the last 6 months. They're either A, behind, or B, they haven't started yet. And they still need to address some of those weaknesses to be the best that they can at this point for either, Loretta's or some of the other bigger races or local races coming up. We have our Rep Racing Night Series starting in August as well. But what are some things that can be identified as a weakness at this point in the game if they haven't, I guess, if they have started and if they haven't started?
This is like ripping a scab off, unfortunately, because at the time of this recording, if you're listening to this, it'll drop towards the end of the month of June, and you could have 4 weekends of qualifiers for Loretta's have already transpired, and there's nothing you could do to turn that back, unfortunately. You have somebody like a Zeb Armstrong who's extremely talented, but extremely busy, so he's probably in the biggest catbird seat, because what happens is he's able to punch his card through because he's super talented, but he might not be in the kind of physical shape that he wants to be. So now you find yourself in a real dichotomy. You qualified, but are you in and this would be on an individual basis, are you happy enough with your current level of fitness to take your qualifying card and go race Loretta's? See, this is where you get into a very unique situation. Anybody who's been following our show for a long period of time, Dan and I's promise to you is that we will never talk about the same thing month, year over year. So June's conversation in 24 will not be the same in 25. 26 will be different than 25. Okay. So what we want you guys to understand in the bigger scheme of things is this. If you're fortunate enough that you qualified and you're not comfortable with your current level of fitness, this is what you were saying, Dan, goes back to November, December. We should have been addressing it, because I'll go back and answer your question specifically. When you go racing, this is where you find out where your biggest opportunities for improvement are. And that's what makes this so difficult. Remember, we were just talking a few minutes ago, some of our listeners are in a part of the country and the world where snow is a reality. They might not be able to get onto the bike until maybe March or April, and then boom, 3 months later. And this is what makes the dark days of winter, when you go to work in the dark and you come home in the dark, and then you still got to go into the gym. Maybe it's on your property. Maybe you've got to stop by the gym on the way home. Maybe you go to the gym on the way to work in the morning. You're going into the gym when it's dark. Not a very not a very motivating environment to go into, for sure. But if you're new to the show, first and foremost, thank you and welcome. But go back and listen to our conversations in November, December. Go back and listen to our conversations after Loretta's in September. What did we say? Your race data dump. Break down what went well and break down what didn't go well. And that's what you need to focus on. So, Dan, when you ask, how do you identify weaknesses? You got to go racing, because you might think that you have good sprint speed and find out it's not good enough. You might think you have good endurance, but find out it's not enough. Now, we can add another dynamic very briefly, and that is the qualifiers are usually less than 10 minutes. Loretta's is usually, it is 20 minutes in duration. So this is another reason why 6 months is important, because unfortunately, there's going to be people that are listening to this show. They'll punch their card in June, and then they're going to start. I see this every year, Dan, is they say, well, I got to start doing some long motos to get ready for Loretta's. Well, you're 4 months too late. And I don't want to be Debbie Downer on it, but I'd be lying to you if I said to you that all of these sprint motos that you've been doing, they've not been building your endurance. And this is, again, for those of you that have been with us for a while, please be patient with the redundancy of the fact that it takes 6 months to build an aerobic engine. It takes 6 months to build a base of strength. And when you put those two together systematically, if you start in November, December, you're going to be ready to go 320s at Loretta's in August. Please listen to the math. 6 months is what it takes to build it, but to hone it in, you need those last two, we call it 8-week windows, right? You've got June and July to fine tune. That's not when you're building a base. That's why this has to be flipped upside down. The base was built early, and then you stack speed on. Unfortunately, most trainers and facilities out there that are uneducated on physiology, they like to advocate the only way you can go fast is by doing sprint work. And that's not how it works, unfortunately.
Yeah, and coach, this year, I don't know, I'm pretty well connected to the vet community, right? And I have heard a lot this year of guys just wanting to go to Loretta's because they never have, right? Vet guys, they never never made it when they were young, or they're just new riders, and it's like, hey, I want to go to Loretta Lynn's. That's like, I think for a vet guy, that's the dream if you're racing as a vet, is to get to Loretta's, because that's the best of the best. But there's a lot of guys that I've seen this year that want to go because they want to satisfy that goal, but they're not prepared. And one of the things the reasons that they're not prepared is the lack of confidence, that they're not sure if they're going to make it. They're just really kind of winging it. Right. And some of these guys, are good enough for these, these area qualifiers and regionals to get through just based on pure speed and, you know, based on the pure speed of the other local talent. But when they get to Loretta's, it's a completely different game, right? And I think that and again, I've heard of this a lot for Loretta's this year is I just want to make it. I don't care what I get. I just want to make it. It just to say that I've been there, right? Which is fine. Everybody's got their prerogative, right? But coach, Loretta's, it's hot. It's grueling. It is nasty. It is it's not for the faint of heart, especially for somebody older like you and I, right? So I think being prepared is critical for a vet rider. I don't know if you
Yeah.
would disagree.
No, I agree with you 100%. And it was interesting. I got to go to World Vets in November at Glen Helen, and I felt like the depth of competition there was something I've never seen before. I mean, think about it. You've got Kurt Nichols out there. You've got some guys that, I mean, literally world champions. And it's not that you don't see it at Loretta's, but the difference at Loretta's is you get the first 8 or 10 top 10 guys. Let's say they're either ex pros or, you know, have, well, unfortunately, most of those guys are top pros nowadays or have been top pros in the past. When you go to World Vets, and I don't care if this comes across, I shouldn't say it that way. I do care what you guys think, but I can't smokescreen the truth that the depth of talent in California is ridiculous. You know, I'm always amazed. You go on a Saturday afternoon, people that you've never seen before are faster than you can even imagine. And they weren't pros. I just think that's the nature of California. You know, for years it's been the epicenter, and the local guys, maybe they weren't interested in going and traveling and racing. But my goodness, when they used to be able to ride 5, 6, Jeff Ward talks about, I've heard Rick Johnson talk about racing 5 times in a week. There were night races and you could race twice on a Saturday. Um, that's going to breed incredible talent. And going back to what you were saying right there, it's the idea that, okay, if you're going to go to Loretta's, you've got 3 20-minute motos. If you're going to go to World Vets, now you're going to have long motos, but think about the difference in the track. Glen Helen is a professional level track. Loretta's is not. So what's so fascinating is, and I've had more athletes that have decided they want to go do things like Mammoth and Mammoth and World Vets. They want to go to Ponca. And it's not a dig on Loretta's. Some of them have been there, done that, or it's not Glen Helen. It's not a pro level track. I mean, you've heard the pros even complain about the fact that Loretta's it's too tight, it's too small. It's a great 85, 125 track, but outside of that, the track's really too small. So when you go and you look at what our listeners are struggling with is, and when I say struggle in a good positive way, think about how diversified your local track is to Glen Helen. Compare your local track to, if you're fortunate enough to ride at Millville, you call that your home track. Look at Hangtown this weekend. I mean, not because Zeb owns it and you're a very good friend of Zeb's. I'm not saying it because of that, but we all could go ride the same track that the pros rode this weekend. Maybe not exactly as it was built, but there's not many people that you can say you can do that. Now, when you're looking at the idea that you go to those types of tracks and then you punch your card in, I think that's more impressive than actually going to Loretta's, because the track just doesn't hold up to the challenges of these other tracks. And that's what I want to encourage our listeners. Depending on where you get a chance to ride, just because there's a lot of marketing behind the idea of going to Loretta's, and unfortunately I've talked to a lot of people who have hired us that said, I chased it for a year or two, went there, and it was like, womp, womp, womp. It wasn't what they thought it was going to be for a multitude of reasons. Expensive, long week. There's people that they're racing against that are ex-pros and they're not quite sure about that. Everybody has their reasons for why they did or didn't like Loretta's. The thing that I want the athletes to think about that listen to and support the show is, are you training to the demands of the track that you're riding? Because here's where the people get duped. If you are training for a local track, and let's just say, Dan, to your point, to qualify, you're not getting ready for the track that you're going to be racing against 42, 41 other of the best riders in the world, especially when you go to Glen Helen, especially when you go to Mammoth. And that's the part that makes this such an interesting conversation, because Can you imagine? I'll change the sport just for illustration purposes. I live in Florida. Our total elevation is about 11 feet, right? And that's an overpass intentionally. If I'm training for a triathlon and I sign up for Ironman Lake Placid in New York, the Ironman Lake Placid in New York has something like 11,000 feet of climbing. Probably not a smart choice for me to choose as one of my A races, triple A races for the year. Because for me to emulate those hills, I can't do it. I can train indoors on a trainer, but nothing is the same as getting out in those hills. I can say I'm fast, and then you're fortunate enough you get to ride Glen Helen. That's a different animal. Hangtown, different animal.
Hey, I've only ridden Glen Helen a few times. Coach, it's the most miserable track to ride. It is so gnarly rough. And I went on like I mean, Thursdays get pretty rough there, but yeah, it's gnarly. Hangtown can get, that's a local to me. I ride Hangtown quite frequently. And yeah, I mean, you go ride Hangtown, then you go ride Riverfront, which is another local track, or East Street, MMX. They're, they're nothing compared to Hangtown. Nothing.
Well, and think about this. Fortunately, Zeb likes us as people, and he's willing to kind of carve the trout down so you and I can go enjoy and ride it. He's building it up for those pro guys. He could be really ornery and leave it super vicious. You know, I don't know what jump it is because obviously watching it on TV, and Zeb was kind enough. We were going to try to host a camp there when you invited us out a couple of years ago, and we couldn't get the logistics to work out. I call it the booter jump. It's that one where it's an uphill triple and they just loft up. And then that one where they jump up and they just looks like they barely get their wheels up on that shelf and it's into that left hander. You know, that is like poetry in motion watching those guys hit it, especially the 450s where they're able to loft a little bit further. But think about it. No, I don't, I'm going to make an assumption. I'm assuming they don't have that uphill triple set up for you and I to hit.
They do. It's still
Okay.
it's a lot smaller. They used to call it the Fly 150. That's
Okay.
like that's when like Eli that year that Eli uh that thing was massive. I mean massive. So now we just call it the Fly Jump because it's still probably 120. It's still big, you know. But that thing's still in there. And then the uphill step up, whatever that you're talking about, that's still there.
But think about it. I'm going to be racing against you at Loretta's, and you've qualified at Hangtown, and I've qualified at a Florida track that has no elevation, right? And then this is where it takes a paradigm shift. You've qualified in a more difficult region. And now I'm going to say that with a grain of salt because you get into the Northeast, you get up there, Southwick area. There's some, the John Dowds of the world, the Keith Johnsons of the world. That is some bad mofos up in that area. JoJo Keller, you think about the legends that came out of that region up there, right? Um, I don't want to say that the California's got a deeper field I'm saying in regards to the difficulty of tracks. Now, again, some people would say, well, my local track is Southwick. Well, I think that you're overqualified for Loretta's. Sorry. If you qualify at Hangtown, you're overqualified for Loretta's racetrack. There's no elevation compared to Hangtown, Millville, Southwick. The reason why I'm going down this thread of thought here is a lot of people will reach out to me and they're really frustrated. They're like, man, I went to this qualifier. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't train to the specificity of that qualifier. You talked about Glen Helen. I went out there for World Vets, and I even mentioned this when we did our show immediately afterwards. You're standing at the base, and I'm not joking. When we say look up Mount Glen Helen, it is no joke. I don't know what the actual rise over run is, but that's damn near straight up. I mean,
it's
we saw some guys that they couldn't get to the top, and they just collected each other at the top. To watch them turn around and come down was like death defying.
yeah, TV does not do Glen Helen justice.
No. And to your point exactly, I couldn't believe it. For a Floridian, it was like you're going up Mount Everest, fourth gear, as hard as you could go, do a 180, and then come down it as fast as you had balls big enough to hang on.
Yep.
Not to mention the braking bumps. So it starts to get, gets those kickers. So think about me. I'm in Florida and I'm riding and I hit a braking bump. Compare that to coming down Glen Helen, come down to Hangtown. It's a totally different animal. And I hear the frustrations of the vet riders that are like, my track was nothing like, or I wasn't prepared for the track that I fill in the blank qualified for or tried to qualify through. And then they go to something like Loretta's, completely different dynamic. Like you said, heat and humidity there is a little bit stifling because it sits in the foothills of the mountains. So, You get that typical everyday heat. If we get a day of rain, you get another moisture package that just lays right on the mountaintop there. Foothills for those who are actually in mountains. My question to you is, if you're from somewhere on the West Coast where relative humidity is very rarely above 30-40%, and you come to Loretta's and it's at 100% humidity, you can't wick away sweat in a humid environment. Water will not evaporate against water. We've talked about it on the show numerous times.
Yeah.
So Dan, it comes back to, like you were saying, it's when we look at about addressing frustrations, a lot of people think frustrations and weaknesses, they tend to think about, well, I go to the gym and I'm not strong on bench press. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, what is it that you're training for? If it's Loretta's, World Vets, Mammoth, that's the end race. But what are you doing to qualify for that? See where there's three dynamics. You have your local track, where you qualify, and then the race itself. And people get caught up in, well, most of us tend to think locally is where I want people to recognize that's where your biggest frustration is coming in. And it's difficult. How am I, as a triathlete, going to train for that much climbing at Ironman Lake Placid? I can get a Wahoo kicker and I can do all the courses in the world, but it's a different story sitting on a stationary trainer versus sitting on a bicycle, sliding back in the seat, pedaling in full circles, getting out of the saddle, stretching my lower back. It's a totally different animal, totally different calorie burn as well.
It really is. One of the things before we get on to the next bullet point, coach, is identifying weaknesses. And I'm going to go ahead and say this is 90% of the vet riders have a weakness in this. And that is starts, practice starts. And I'm thinking, coach, I'm not committed, but I'm thinking about racing the Rep Racing Night Series this year.
Nice.
All my buddies are like, I just haven't raced like that in a long time. And everybody's like, man, you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to do it. I said, the only way I'll do it is if I can practice my starts and I can get my starts down. Two reasons. One, I don't want to be in a first turn pileup. I'm deathly afraid of those things. I always have been. That has been my weakness. I hate the first turn, right? So I want to put myself in the best position possible, off the gate. And then two, it's the position, right? Like, yeah, there might be faster guys behind me, but if I put myself out there, first, then to me, it's kind of easier to go backwards, if you will, than have to try to run people down, right? So, um, I don't think as a vet rider, and I'm going to speak as a general whole, not to say that it's everybody, because I know there's through practice, but if you're going to race, you got to be practicing starts, whether that's, you have a buddy that's going to pick up a rock and drop the rock. Coach, those risk racing practice gates are awesome. That is such a small investment that can pay off massively for results and, in my opinion, safety.
If anybody that's listening to this show follows us on the navigating amateur motocross, I do that with Derek Harris from HP Development. We were fortunate enough to have Tony Alessi on as one of our guests. And I love this quote, and I've shared it with you before. And that was, he said, where else on the track can you pass 39 other guys on one straightaway? And he said, for that reason alone, we spent the majority of our time getting good at starts. Now, obviously it's easy to be an armchair quarterback, right? When you're talking to the father of the guy that's probably the best starter in the history, statistically speaking. But think about the logic. Why wouldn't you do it? Now, I know for the listeners, clutch baskets can be expensive, but so is traveling to a race. So are, to your point, Dan, hospital bills, right? And it's one of those situations, even if you have to designate a bike that all you do is, you use it for starts and you use it as a mud bike. You just realize that everything on that bike is designed for wear and tear. And, I don't know what the discrepancy is on your new beautiful 25 compared to the 24. I know some people would argue that there's power differences and stuff, but the whole idea here is trying to eliminate I hate to use the word excuse because I'm not using it as a negative example, but how many times, Dan, have you heard someone say, well, I ran out of time. If I had 2 more laps, I would have won the race. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Well, why were you starting back in 17th? Well, you screwed the pooch on the start, to your point exactly. So for me as a physiologist, what I want is when you're practicing your starts, I want you to be able to put as much pressure on yourself as if you get this hole shot and I'm going to give you $5,000 cash. and I want you to zoom out on 10,000 feet on this. Isn't it interesting for some of the listeners? They're in a part in their career where they're maybe a fifth or an eighth place racer, and they're doing everything they can to bridge the gap to those top two. And then for a lot of them, they get there, and then when they get to the top, the conversation and the perspective changes, and they go, "Man, there's a lot of pressure up there. Let me get this straight. You worked your butt off to get to the top, and then you're telling me that you feel pressure to be at the top." Now, there's nothing wrong with that if we're gonna have a very blunt conversation with each other. Mike LaRocco always preferred to be the chaser versus the chasee. Mike LaRocco, correct me if I'm wrong, and somebody leave a comment below here if you're watching us on YouTube. I can only remember one time Mike LaRocco got the whole shot, and he didn't win the race. Of all the races that he won, he always came through the pack. That was his MO. So the point being here is I I feel like as a physiologist, I have a responsibility to get you physically in a position where you can get the whole shot. What I mean by that is think about the start. When the pin is pulled, that's reaction time. We could talk about blood sugar. We could talk about eye-hand coordination. We could talk about reaction time. All of it can be trained. All of it can be improved. Then when you let the clutch out, transitioning over the gate, does your bum slide backwards? Do you have enough of a death grip that you can stay centered over the bite? Do you know when you're too far forward and you get wheel spin versus too far back and you get too much hookup? Now you're loop out Larry. Then you transition over the gate. Are your legs spread wide open, or are you able to keep your boots locked right up against the pegs and up against the engine casings? When you make that executive decision to pull those feet up, can you do that without throwing the balance of the bike off? Do you know exactly precisely when you grab your second shift? You do all of that. Now we get to the first turn. Do you know how to use the front brake enough to manage the first turn? Because if you go in there and you nail that rear brake, the rear end's going to come around. So you've got to shave off your entrance speed with the front brake, which also gives you the benefit of shortening the wheelbase, which allows the bike to turn like a Suzuki. You've got a win-win-win. So Dan, it goes back to like you were saying, with past race results, videos, data dumps, and all this conversation, now you can tell me, hey, Rob, on the start, this is where I struggle. Timing, transitioning with bringing my feet up, grabbing the second shift, and controlling the first turn. So with all of our riders, what we have them do is we put a stopwatch. We use a wrist starting gate. When that gate hits the ground, the top stopwatch starts, and we time them through the first turn and over an obstacle. So the start and the finish measurement is exactly the same every time. Because I want you to stop and think about how many different ways can you get through a first turn? An infinite amount of ways. If you were literally to sit down and to plot how many different lines are there in a first turn, literally it's infinite. You can go out and go in. You can go in and stay in. You can go middle, go low. You can go middle, drift wide. I mean, I don't think I need to elaborate on that. My question to you from a physiological standpoint is, how much are you arguing with the motorcycle from when you release the clutch to getting over the first obstacle? How much of that is you? How much of that is, and then start filling in the blanks, balance, timing, strength. Maybe your inner thighs aren't strong enough. Dan, you've seen this, especially with the vet crowd, right? We all love the big, big, beautiful bling bikes.
Yeah.
And most of us aren't strong enough to hold on to what we purchased, right?
Yeah.
So you crack that throttle and then your bum is sliding backwards because you don't have inner thigh strength. And then when you go to stand up and transition from a seated position to standing, you throw the balance off because you're putting more weight on one peg than the other. You're not looking far enough ahead. Well, is that because you don't have enough strength in your upper shoulders? Or maybe the muscles in the front of your neck are too tight, which keeps you from bringing your head up. And that's when you and I were talking about this off the record, this is the kind of stuff that frustrates people and they don't even know it's happening. And then when I try to walk them through why it's happening, my responsibility is to show them how to fix it. That's why I appreciate you doing this show with me once a month, because I want to share with the vet riders, hey, time got away from you pretty quickly, right? You thought it was November, you thought you had plenty of time, and then you woke up and it was June 1st and you had a regional. You're like, rut-row, now what do I do? Well, then you went racing and you got frustrated because your starts were bad. What part of your start was bad? Why was your bar, especially when you get what we call accidental success, Dan? You get that person that gets one really good start out of 6 and they're like, well, what I do differently in that one compared to the other 5? Well, that's the $1 million question. Is it a timing issue? Is it a transition issue? Is it, how many people, Dan, don't know when to switch gears on a bike to keep it pulling?
Probably most, coach.
I would say it'd be in the 95 plus category. And I'm amazed. Derek Harris brought this up on our amateur show, and I thought it was profound. He said, when was the last time, because we were talking about young riders, especially because they all ride two strokes, they don't know how to, they have never been taught how to keep a bike accelerating, right?
Yep.
They think if it's making a ton of noise. Now, four strokes where you're a little bit of a, I won't say easier, but you do have a rev limiter that yells at you when you're bouncing off the rev limiter. So, like when I teach a performance camp, and you've been kind enough to join us when we were at East Street, right? The idea here is the bike needs to either be accelerating or decelerating, never coasting. Well, that requires strength. That requires stabilized blood sugar. That requires everything that we're talking about. But I want to loop back to your original statement. You're not practicing starts, and therefore you're not putting yourself into a position to actually be able to dominate the race from the front. And this is why I brought up the psychological side of it. You get yourself into a position where all of a sudden you're now the chasee and you haven't mentally positioned yourself to embrace that. And then you crack under pressure. And then what do? You go back to your fifth, sixth, because you take the pressure off yourself. And this is what becomes, in my opinion, one of the most enjoyable parts about physiology.
Well, and if you look at a guy like Jet Lawrence, right? When you're out front, you can manage the race, right? You can dictate the pace. When you are behind and you got guys that are faster in front of you than you are, you're trying to catch them, right? Which leads to riding over your head, which sometimes leads to crashing. So I don't know. If a guy's faster than me, he's going to go around me, right? At my age, coach, I don't want to ride over my head.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to give myself the best possibility of getting out front, leading some laps. If I win, yeah. If I not, I'm cool too, right? It's not a big deal. But the
Well,
biggest
go to the point that you just mentioned. Again, for those of you that are listening to this, maybe on a historical recording, we're recording this in June of 25, and the second round at Hangtown just happened this weekend. And I loved what James Stewart said. When Casey Cochran was out front, he was not slowing the pace down. He was just holding the main line and made it difficult for people to get around him. And I thought that was such a profound comment, because then when Kobush started going backwards, that's when he's like, now you need to get out of the way, because you're not driving the pace, you're slowing people down. To your point exactly, Dan, you get the whole shot and you get somebody that's holding the group back. Well, you've got clean track and you're able to get away from everybody. And this is, again, where you get into what we refer to as the racecraft. Is if you know how to ride a wide bike, then as long as you hit the main lines, you make everybody have to work harder. To your point, you're in control. And whenever you make people adapt to the way that they race you, I don't want this to sound like a textbook cliche, but just let it sink in, let it simmer for just a moment. My goal is to take your weaknesses, convert them to a strength. If I complement your existing, you're in the toolbox world, so we use a toolbox example. If I can take a weakness and convert it to a strength, and I take that strength and I add it to your existing strengths and put them in your toolbox, you can sprint. You have great race endurance. You can handle heat. You can handle high intensity. Now you force everybody to change the way that they race against you. Now, if I'm racing against you and you drop me like a bad idea because I'm a shit sprinter and you're really good, as long as I don't improve my sprint speed, you own me. As soon as I improve my sprint speed, now I've got your attention that you can no longer drop me early. So now it's a little bit more of a mano a mano. But as long as you have a strength that I'm not willing to bridge, and I say this to all our clients, you're getting beat at your exposed weaknesses. And the sooner you address them, the sooner you can bridge them. I mean, think about it. Think about any race that you've ever seen in your life. And I always like to use Eli Tomac, because if you look back at Eli before he won his first 450 championship, how many laps did he lead? The most. How many main events did he have? Wins. The most. And for 3 years, he couldn't get a 450 championship. Not because he wasn't fast, but because he's silly little frustrated. Remember, his pants blew out. He, had a few 3 years in a row. He couldn't do it. So when people kind of scoff at me about, hey, you're getting beat by your exposed weaknesses, you could pick on Chase with tucking the front end at Honda, right? All the little jokes put aside, the idea is, what did Ricky say about James? If James stayed up, he knew he was racing for second. If he could force James into a mistake, and that's a perfect example of it, he was just trying to expose James's tendency to hit the ground. And Ricky's got a very fat checking account because of James not willing to kind of throttle it back a little bit and stay up on two wheels.
Coach, we went extremely long on bullet point number one today.
No worries. And that's the cool part about our show is we can carry other concepts to other shows. So we'll keep it on our top. We'll stay on time.
Yeah, let's move to number two, and we'll kind of move quickly through these next four here. But the number two bullet is the importance of bike specific strength. Now, this one I love, and let's just touch on number three at the same time. The importance of bike specific flexibility. So let's talk about strength and flexibility at the same time. This is what I love the most about motocross, right? Is I love, like, I've got buddies that, they're gym rats. They go to the gym every week and they're fit, like just yoked out and, oh, I could ride this motorcycle. They show up, they do like 2 or 3 laps and they call me the next day and they're like, dude, I'm the sorest that I've ever been in my life. Like, what the hell? There is something so different about being strong and being strong on the bike, and vice versa, coach. You know that I'm not the best at the gym, right? You've known that for years. I have straight up don't like the gym. That's just me, right? Not the best in the gym, but I'm okay on a bike, right? I've got bike strength, but man, I go to the gym and I struggle. So, there's a big difference.
Yeah, there's a huge difference. And we could talk about this for literally a couple hours straight. I want to just keep it on the idea that, and I've used this illustration publicly, but I think it's more relevant to our conversation now than ever. Let's visualize a left-hand turn. And you've made that executive decision, your fourth gear wide open, and you've made that executive decision that you're going to transition from on the gas to on the brakes. And as you make that transition from on the gas to on the brakes, you decide that you're going to start to sit down and put that left leg out. Now, do this in slow motion. As soon as you raise your left boot up, you're now doing a single legged stand. You haven't squatted yet because you're still standing up, but it's going to transition from a standing to a sitting. So you're doing a one leg isolated squat with your right leg pushing on the right peg, trying to turn left. What could go wrong? The bike's being weighted on the right side and you're trying to make the bike turn left. You put that leg out there with the weight of a boot. Now, if you're not driving, listening to this, I want you to take your fingertips and I want you to push right at your belt line, right at the top of your quads, and you're going to feel this bone stick out, this little bony process on the top of your pelvic girdle. Your quadriceps insert way up at the top of those hip flexors. So you've got the weight of the boot, let's call it 5 to 8 pounds, depending on your boot size. You're letting it hang out there in front by your radiator, hopefully out by your front, hub, and you've got braking bumps. So now this thing's floating in the air, your hip flexors. This is where your point of both strength and flexibility come in. Your hip flexors have to keep the boot up so you don't dab your foot, but it's fighting against the tightness of your hamstrings because you don't have good hamstring flexibility. So you get tired. So you sit down earlier or you put your leg out less and less. Or you put your leg out and you dab your foot and you blow your knee out where you hurt your hip. Because what we're seeing is the boot is keeping the ankle pretty stable. Knee braces are keeping the knees pretty stable. So the energy just keeps going north. And that's why we're seeing a high level of scar tissue in the hip flexors. We're seeing a lot in the deep lateral rotators as well. So now we come full circle. You are not able to butter a left-hand turn. Is that a strength issue or a flexibility issue? That's the million-dollar question. You're putting your foot out there. The muscles on the top of your leg need to keep the foot up. The hamstring in the bottom has to be flexible enough to allow you to put it up there without creating additional resistance. And then I like what you said. You've got these guys that can, tremendous amount of muscle and they can move a lot of weight. The problem is, especially if you use a lot of machinery, is there's no balance in that. When you guys aren't driving your cars or trucks, I want you to do this drill. I want you to stand up on one leg and I want you to bend the other leg at 90 degrees. I want you to look across the room and then I want you to close your eyes and I want you to go as long as you can without putting that foot down. You're going to notice as soon as you close your eyes, the foot that's on the ground is immediately going to grab it like a bird. And what you're feeling is a subject known as proprioceptive balance. As long as your eyes are open, you can pretty much see where you want to go. Well, the reason why proprioceptive balance matters on a motorcycle is you have a left and a right peg. You have what's going on above and below the seat. And on the human body, you've got the right and the left leg. you have what's going on above and below the belly button, and you have what's going on the front and the back side of the body. So you need to lift weights in the same way that you ride a motorcycle. Three planes of movement, left and right peg, above and below the seat, and what's going on in front of the pegs and behind the pegs. So that's what I mean by making sure that your strength is specific to the motorcycle, and make sure that you don't become so developed that, and let me digress for just 1 second. If your elbow hurts, there's an imbalance between your biceps and triceps. If your knees hurt, more than likely there's an imbalance between your quads and your hamstrings. If your shoulder hurts, there's usually an imbalance between your pecs and your rhomboids. Those are the muscles in between your shoulder blades. Now, is it a fix 100% of the time? No, it's not. But what we have found, especially with developing athletes, is that they want to have the big pecs for the chicks on the beach, right? So they do superset on the chest. Well, that starts to cause the shoulder to roll forward because the pec muscles are so developed that the shoulders roll forward. So again, if you're not driving, do this. Take your shoulders and roll them forward as far as you can until you feel that tension in between your shoulder blades. That's what overdeveloped chest muscles feel like. Why does that matter to you? Because you're working on your biomechanics on the motorcycle, and you're in a yin and a yang against the strength and the flexibility. If you have tight hamstrings and you try to keep your leg elevated, your quads are going to get tired, not just because of the weight of your leg, but because of the resistance from the hamstring. So, Dan, that's why I'm glad you bring it up. Strength has to be complemented with flexibility. Flexibility has to be complemented with strength, and it needs to be specific to the three dimensions of a motorcycle.
Hey, coach, also a pro tip when you're doing that one-legged demo that you just explained, do that sober. Describe some, coach, that I see on the side of Highway 80 by the California Highway Patrol.
Yep, exactly. Well, in the crazy part about it is you'll have people who don't know anything about motocross that are trying to train you in the gym with what we call traditional movements. And like, for example, literally your chest and your shoulders have to work simultaneously. Think about push and pull, right? You're accelerating and then you're decelerating. Now, when I say that, it makes sense to everybody. It's taking it to the gym and applying it correctly, because you can get so strong that you become slow. You could become so muscular that you become slow. Everybody's excited about putting on muscle, and we test this with our athletes on a regular basis. Everyone's excited when they put on muscle. Can you imagine, Dan, if I took any of our listeners and I walk up to them on race day and I just take a simple 5-pound dumbbell and I slide it in the back of their pants? If I take that 5-pound dumbbell and I just duct tape it to the top of your seat, maybe I duct tape it to the front fender. I'm being sarcastic, right? Just choose a part where you could literally adhere a 5-pound addition to the bike. You'd say, man, it's a totally different bike. It handles differently. That's what you got to be careful with muscle mass. Now,
Wow.
you could also say the same thing for putting on body fat. Now, that's a totally different story because we get into economies of calories and other things like that. But because you brought up the idea that you've got some really strong dudes and they get exhausted and extremely sore, that's because they're training wrong in the gym. Are you training for the beach? Or are you training for the three dimensions of movement on a motorcycle? And this has been kind of one of our little trump cards with our athletes. Now, for our listeners, it's the vet show. If you're listening to this and you have young athletes, that's why I cannot tell you how important it is to start working with athletes as early as 65s. We're not trying to make them Arnold Schwarzenegger. We're trying to make them strong and flexible, specific to pushing and pulling a 65 or an 85cc bike. It's a hell of a lot harder than swinging a baseball bat.
Yeah. Um, Coach, we're real short on time today. I'm gonna actually skip number 4. The number 4
Okay.
will other episode.
Yeah.
It's the correct kind of cardio, and we talk about cardio quite frequently, so maybe we could put this in somewhere in an upcoming show. But number 5 is just briefly, I wanted to talk about a sample of a sample of riding during the week, cross training and lifting. Like, what does a typical good week look like for a vet rider?
I always like to reverse this, and I hope that the listeners will take this very seriously. I'm not trying to be sarcastic at all. Reverse engineer your week. How much time do you have to train? I could put together the most sophisticated program. If it's not realistic on the amount of time that you have, it's not a good program for you. We've had some top CEOs in our endurance division that wanted to train for an Ironman. And by the time we spent the first couple weeks, we do a schedule called a projected versus actual. And when we look at what they thought they were doing on a given day and what they actually did, and then we reverse engineer and said, how much time do you have to train? It wasn't enough. I would be stealing their money and they'd be wasting their time to say, yeah, you could train for an Ironman on that amount of time. It wasn't enough. This is what brings this conversation full circle, ironically. You've got to be careful when you decide that you want to go do a race that requires take Dan, do you know off the top of your head? I thought the motos at World Vets were a little bit longer than usual. Didn't they give them a full 20-minute moto for
think so, yeah. They're
and
typically
and
normal.
and if we're wrong, please leave it in the comments because I don't want to be incorrect and state the wrong time. But you've got to keep in mind that if when you choose a AAA priority race, it's World Vets. And let's say that you're fortunate if you're going to race in 2 or 3 or 4 classes or however many you're eligible for, do you have the time to train for the demands of the race that you've chosen? That's where you have to start, Dan. So let's just say perfect best case scenario, you can ride on the weekends. Let's just start with that. Anything that I say, you can go over and above that. If you can ride 5 times a week, you can change the numbers accordingly. Because what we always say is nothing replaces seat time. Nothing. If you have a chance to ride, we always want you to ride. So if you can ride on the weekends, and this is Dan, where I think your question is so on point, is imagine you're grinding out Monday through Friday at work. You're making sure that you get your kids to the track, you get your other children to their soccer games, you're going to date night with your partner, all that goes into it, right? Well, the idea here is what are you left with on Saturday when you get to go ride? Are we getting sloppy seconds? That's going to lead to an injury. Am I going to really get the best out of you biomechanically when you go ride on Saturday and you're running on average 5 hours of sleep per night? And that's, Dan, where this is where speaking with the clients on a regular basis. I've got athletes that do very well racing on the weekends and they get to cross train 2 days a week. I've got some athletes that are fortunate enough they can cross train 5 times a week. You got to figure out where the athlete's at. And that's not me, everybody's a winner. No, we just have to be realistic. Now, I will say this as a little side note. This is why I get frustrated with professionals. Because think about our listeners. They're the novelty of getting paid to race a dirt bike. Maybe we have some listeners like a Jeff Emig or somebody like that. That's awesome. You've had a time in your life where you got paid to ride your dirt bike. But for the rest of us, we've had to try to figure out how do we squeeze it in, if you will. Dan, it's only gotten worse for you now that your daughter rides, because now you've got a second bike to maintain. You got a second bike to clean. Even though she helps you, you do a good job of having her be a part of it. This final attention to details, obviously, you're not having your daughter do it. So the starting point is when you can get seat time, plug those in. So, Dan, just for conversation's sake, let's say that the listeners can ride on Saturday. You want to make sure that you don't come into Saturday smoked. The same way we were talking about, unfortunately, at the time of this podcast drop, it's too late to try to get in shape for Loretta's. Sorry. You're not going to gain any significant fitness in 7, 8 weeks. Now, you could come into Loretta's extremely exhausted and make it worse, or you can focus on coming in as fresh as possible, make the best of what you've got. You only have to race one race per day for 20 minutes. I think even with just a regular, some level of baseline fitness, you can race 20 minutes once a day. And I hope that doesn't come across as crass, Dan. But when you come back to the idea of setting an ideal training week, if you know you can ride on Saturday, do everything you can to come in fresh. So you don't want to squeeze a hard workout in the gym on Friday. You don't want to do a hard interval workout on Thursday, cross training wise, concept 2 rowers, swimming, biking, running, whatever you like to do cardio wise. And this is where that little negative canary gets on our shoulder, Dan. It's like, well, I want to ride this weekend, so I got to get in shape. No, you get in shape by just being consistent. Even if it's 30 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, it's better than nothing. But I want you to protect Saturday like it's the world championships. So do a little bit on Friday just to kind of keep the body moving. We say energy creates energy. But what should you focus on Friday? Make sure that you get plenty of sleep. Make sure that you're hitting your hydration marks. Make sure that you're grazing throughout the day. Therefore, when you get on the motorcycle, you've got a rebuilt motor. I mean, Dan, I know this is going to sound sarcastic to the listeners, but what would you rather ride? A bike that's got 100 hours on it or a bike that's got 90 minutes on it? It's nice and broken in, the frame's comfortable.
Oh, I mean, I do like worn out bikes because they're comfortable to ride, but 100 hours on an engine, that scares me, coach.
And you think about it, you get on a new bike or a freshly rebuilt one, it just feels so good to have that quick response and know that it's predictable, right? And that's all we're trying to do. Unfortunately, if we neglect the ability to recover every day, as I teased before, I don't have the ability to reach in your chest and replace your adrenals. And the only time the body can rejuvenate is through food and sleep. That's why I get so irate when you see these social media gurus that are advocating intermittent fasting, promoting, keto and paleo and all these other extremes. That's great for social media followings because it's extreme, but it undermines health and wellness. Now, I've had people that have left me some pretty scathing comments saying, "Oh, you must be a sellout to the pharmaceuticals because you're against intermittent fasting." I'm not against intermittent fasting, and I've read tons of case studies clinically of what it does. I get all the science behind it. I'm asking you to look at how much stress is your body under, and then you're going to now deprive it of calories and add more stress. That to me seems counterintuitive.
There's a time and place for everything, right? But that's not necessarily the time or place for motocross, right? So
Well, what pisses me off is the ones that are on social media. They're like, look at me, I'm Mr. Intermittent Fasting. Look at me, I'm Mr. Paleo. Look at me, I'm Mr. Keto. And then they report themselves to my office, and we find out that they've been jacked up on HGH and synthetic, testosterone. And the reason why they're super buff and super muscular is not because of their keto and the things that they're advocating on their social media platforms. It's unfortunately, it's a bait and switch, is what it is. And like I've had one individual that came to us on social media. It was a female, and she was all about her image, very small articles of clothing on, six pack ripped abs, and she built an entire fortune on this image. And then she presented herself to us, and she had smoked her adrenals. Not my words. Her doctor said, "Look, your adrenals are almost to the point of ill repair. There's not much more we can do."
wow.
So now you've got a mid 30-year-old girl who has, adrenal fatigue beyond belief. For the listeners, please jot this down, commit it to memory. Adrenal fatigue external signs are going to be craving simple sugars, night sweats, tired and can't go to sleep, and no sex drive. You could have one or you could have all of those as a combination. So this is where it's very intriguing to me, where people will get kind of in my face and say, "Well, what are you talking about?" I'm like, "Well, what are you dealing with?" "Well, I'm craving simple sugars like a crack addict." That's an external sign of an internal problem. Well, if your whole, persona is based on this image, you have to remember, when you're taking synthetic HGH and testosterone, you'll be excessively lean. I want all the listeners to think about this. And Dan, you and I have talked about this off the record. You take your health very seriously, but you're not obsessed with it. Okay. So let's say that you are in a position where you adjust your schedule and you're doing 1 hour a day. Because I want to go back to the original question that you asked about laying out a week. Start with what you have, 20 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it is, and set yourself up to be able to be fresh when you ride. If we come back full circle and you have somebody who is saying that they have night sweats, okay, well, that's an external sign of an internal problem. It's not me arguing with you. When your body is giving you a sign that one of those big four, that's telling you that the adrenals are overworked. If we took a blood sample, we'd see high levels of cortisol. Well, if you start injecting testosterone and HGH, you're going to get an artificial, extremely cut body. And I want all the listeners to think about this. If you're in the gym 1 hour a day, just go with me here, whether you are or you're not, go with me figuratively. What does your physique look like doing 6 hours a week? Let's say you're doing 6 days and 1 day of complete rest the way you should. If you're not getting excessively lean, what makes you think their trick is so much different? If you're eating fruits, vegetables, and lean protein, nobody gets fat eating fruits, vegetables, and lean protein. It's a fact. How come you're eating fruits and vegetables and lean protein and you're working out 1 hour a day and you're not as lean as that other person? Somebody please explain it to me. Oh, their workout methodology is so much better than yours? Strength training is strength training. Cardio is cardio. Now, we could get into the argument on the intensity levels. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
You take the same person and you do the exact same workout that you're doing, and they get tremendously different results. Some, as the old saying goes, something in the equation is not matching up. So
Yep.
that's why I want to leave everybody with the idea: set your week up for round riding. And then when you do lift weights, don't lift so hard that you make yourself exhausted and have a lot of residual soreness, because then when you carry that onto the bike, it messes up your body position and your biomechanics. And if
Wow.
is as benign as that sounds, that's really all it is, Dan.
Not only that, it's miserable, right? It makes you not want to go back the next day. So
Right. And that's where just a little bit every day really is fits into the consistency goal that we're all searching for. And that's where, again, we're all men, right? We want to go in there. We want to watch the weights get tossed around. We love seeing our big pecs in the mirror and all that. That's cool. But that's where it's a catch 22. If you've got a partner that keeps saying, "Oh, you're doing all this working out and you still have 5 pounds around your waist," well, you could quit your job. You could give your children away. You could sell your house. You could sell your business. Whatever's driving your stress level up, that's probably going to be the only way you're going to lose those extra 5 pounds. See, that's where stress, and it's not, you're not playing the victim card, but you have to deal with real numbers. And I'll say this in closing, Dan. Think about Michael Phelps. And I always use him because he's such a decorated athlete at the Olympics, right? If there were things in his life that were stressing him out and was negatively impacting his ability to perform in the pool, they would take those things out of his life. Well, our listeners don't have that choice. Like a tease, you can't get rid of your children. You can't get rid of your partner. I mean, you could, right? You could get a divorce. You could put your kids up for adoption. You could sell your business. And yes, you probably would have less body fat. You'd have other issues,
you have
but
other, yeah.
yeah, you'll have other issues. But that's where I find it interesting when someone's like, well, my wife just keeps busting my balls because I'm not super hyper cut. Okay, well, what kind of stress do you have going on in your life? And I want all the listeners to think about this. Whatever you do for a living, whatever you do, I want you to take somebody that's fresh out of college, 18, 19 years old, right? And I want you to put them in your life. I want them to manage your bank account personally and professionally. I want them to manage your family. I want them to manage your wife. I want you to manage, I want them to manage your dirt bike. I want them to manage the maintenance of the bike. I want them to manage driving you to and from the races. If you look at a factory team, all joking aside, right? Eli Tomac flies private, gets off a plane, goes directly to his custom motorhome. The bed in that motorhome is exactly what he has at home. What's sitting in that kitchen is exactly what he left in Cortez. He walks from that motorhome, walks over to a truck that was driven, a bike that was built, handed new sets of gear that people brought to the race. You, every one of you listening, you do all that. Plus, you're your own cheerleader. Plus, you're your own financier. Plus, you're your own cook. Plus, you're your own mechanic. Plus, 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 plus. I don't know why you're stressed to the gills.
Yep. And that's for us, that's never gonna go away. We always, as a vet,
Exactly.
we always are gonna have that no matter what. And I think that's the thing, right? I think we have to all remember this. At 41 years old, coach, I am not gonna go win an AMA outdoor national. I'm not, I'm probably not, I'm gonna just say now I'm never gonna qualify, right? I just know that, right? We all have lives, and I think that yes, you need to have goals, whether it's go to World Vets or but be realistic, right? We all have families. We all have a lot going on in our lives. Motocross is not it. It's not the only thing that we have. So we have to do the best that we can to work with what we've got. And
Well, and I want you to go there healthy. See, and think about this. There is an incredible novelty to the idea when I start working with a client and we kind of rearrange their schedule a little bit. And I've been fired for this. People say, I hired you to bust my balls. And I'm like, your balls are already busted enough. What you need is more food and more sleep. And they're like, well, I hired you as a performance coach. I'm like, I can't get into the realm of performance. It's like you wanting me to create this fire breathing dragon motor with a piston and a main bearing that has 100 hours on it. You can put bold new graphics on it. You can yell at it and scream at it. It isn't going to create new power. But that's what we do as a human. I'm exhausted at work. I'm exhausted from my relationship. I'm exhausted working on my bike till 2 in the morning and then go to the gym and then get pissed off that you can't produce a lot of power. You can't do those interval workouts. Then you go and you stack the week and you go out on Saturday and you shit the bed and you get mad at yourself. Well, like yelling at a bike that's got 100 hours isn't going to change that it needs to be rebuilt. So when I'm asking an athlete, let's focus on food and sleep. And Dan, you would be amazed. It is like a 7-year-old at Christmas when I'm starting to see and talk to athletes that are like, man, this feels good not to be effing exhausted. I hear that a lot. This is a strange feeling. I'm not exhausted. And then what ends up happening, because the tail of the snake always follows the head, You get about 6, 8 months and you're dialing in the nutrition and the sleep. We're still training, but we're not busting, we're not we're not supersetting, we're not doing anything super crazy and hard. Then when you get the rest up, then guess what happens? The athlete, it happens every single time. The athlete's like, man, I feel good in the gym. Why? Well, because you're rebuilt. Then you get a couple days a week in the gym, and cardio is not a ball buster. It's all cardio, but or excuse me, it's all aerobic, but it feels good. You finish strong, and you're like, oh man, that was a soft workout. I usually bust my balls. Then you get on the motorcycle, and lap times are consistent, and you can ride longer. And then the rider comes back and goes, this is easy. I'm like, yeah, this is the part that you've been fighting me the hardest on. Food, sleep, and water builds the foundation. Well, now we can get into biomechanics. If you're fortunate enough and you have a riding coach, Buddy Antonez, the Brock Tickles, the Ben Riddles of the world, the Ryan Sipes of the world, you know, you've got all of these great resources. Well, now you can actually get better on a dirt bike. Why? Because you're fresh.
You got the basics handled.
I know it sounds crazy, but that's why I say it's literally a novelty. When someone's like, I've never felt this fresh, and I'm like, what a novel idea. That's crazy to me. So
Coach, so number 14 has been real. Train smarter, not harder. Thank you so much to you for your time invested into this and all of the vet riders out there. I want to thank Nutritional Frontiers as well for being on board with us. And I want to thank the listeners. You guys are awesome. You guys continue to leave those comments in the YouTube section and on Instagram, and love getting the emails. So you guys are awesome. Keep it up. Coach, any parting words?
no, just as usual, huge thanks to everybody who's been with us since day one. This show is about just trying to demystify the world of vet racing, and we'll continue to bring new subjects up every month. Dan, thank you for your time, and we will see you next month.
Yeah.
Peace.